Y'all, imagine this. Imagine when everything you thought you knew about education was taught to you by your enemy. Imagine everything you thought you knew about medicine and health was taught to you by your enemy. Imagine everything you knew or thought you knew about spirituality was taught to you by your enemy. Right? So when you realize that everything that you know, everything that you believe was taught to you by your enemy, it is a sad situation to wake up to the realization that your enemy even taught you who your enemies were, right? They taught you this country was your enemy, that country was your enemy, this country over here was your enemy, this guy was your enemy, Hitler was your enemy, right? And then you realize the enemies that they was pointing to, because they always say, when you point a finger at somebody, you got to point that finger right back to yourself. So the whole time, our enemy was right here, teaching us in the education institution. The whole time, they were teaching us how to think when it came to our spirituality. The whole time, they was teaching us lies. Everything that you thought you knew was a lie. All of it. So what do when you realize that everything that you thought you knew was a freaking lie? Then you got to wipe the slate clean. You take what you can, some of the stuff that might make sense, right? I mean, because math makes sense. How they teach it might not make sense, right? But there are some things that you can keep. But most of it, y'all, we got to throw it in the freaking trash. And that's where we are. And start over again, building a whole new civilization. Because that's where we are. We have to build a whole new civilization. And there is a blueprint for everything. There is a blueprint, a recipe if you want to make a dish. There is a blueprint that you have to follow if you want to build a house or a building. There is a blueprint to build a bridge. There is a blueprint for health. There is a blueprint for wisdom, real education. There's a blueprint. But we're following people who are not following the blueprint. So I give you the blueprint in the book, From Stolen Intellect to a Genius Revolution. When the internet don't work, when the YouTube is down, because they talking about restructuring some things, you got to have the book. You can't have it, the ebook, right? The ebook is fine. Get the ebook. I don't care how you get it. Get the ebook. But if the system go down, like one time, we couldn't even use the cell phones for a whole day, right? Everything was down. So you always got a book to fall back on. So get both. Get the ebook. Get the book, too. But here's my point. And there's so many points. But one in particular, my cousin recently, she was here visiting me. This is just an example of health. And she was saying, I'm going to get to the bottom of why my father would have epileptic seizures. And I said, sweetie, can I tell you why? How I understand why your father was having epileptic seizures. And if any of you, and there are plenty of you, and your babies are having epileptic seizures, just for an example. And the book is so much more. This is just one piece of how my mind works, of how the downloads come, and how the Most High give it to me to give it to you. Because this system has made everything so complicated that it's hard to, and it's hard to navigate your way through, right? And so I'm here to help us navigate through. through the mess, through the lies. So back to her question about her father. I said, they want to make the brain to be so complicated. It's not complicated. It was never meant to be complicated. So I said, the seizures. I say, imagine when somebody's being electrocuted. They're making the same movements that a person is having a seizure make, because they're being electrocuted from the inside, right? A person that's being electrocuted by water and electricity is on the outside. But a person that's being electrocuted, movements are the same, but it's the brain. It's the wiring from the brain. That myelin sheath has dissolved. Let's put it that way, right? I'm not going to say unraveled, but I'm going to say dissolved. So when that myelin sheath dissolves, it exposes that nerve ending, that part that's electrocuting that person on the inside. But I said, but your dad didn't know that he could regrow his myelin sheath, right? Vitamin E helps with that, but it has to be the right vitamin E. They use words and things like vitamin E, and you got to know the source. And I go into that in the book. What source? Okay. Red palm oil, just so you'll know. It's one avenue because it's a healthy fat, right? So she don't have to look no further to understand why her dad died. Yeah, we could go look it up and see what our enemy said about it on AI, right? How our enemy explained it, okay? But why we gonna keep looking and using them as a reference? Because it's gonna keep us perpetuating their lies, right? And I'm done with that. Here's another example in education. We got teachers that are spending 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years to get their bachelor's degree, to get their specialists, right, to get their credentials. And I'm not taking anybody's credentials away from them because my daughter is a teacher. And I love that they're learning about the development, the milestones, right, social emotional learning. But it don't help because it doesn't get you to the root cause. Here's a point in education. How is it that they can spend all them years in school? Because when you're taught by the enemy, your enemy not going to reveal to you the very essence, the very foundation of what's wrong. They done talk all social emotional learning, all of the development, all the milestones, all the different learning stages of a child. They done learn all of that. But yet they know nothing about the minerals that cultivate learning, that cultivate memory, right? That's why our kids can't remember how to tie their shoe. That's why they can't remember instructions. That's why they can't remember math. That's why they can't remember their address. That's why they can't remember anything, right? And then we go to the doctor and we be looking for something from them. But again, our enemy is behind that institution. So they're not going to teach nothing there too. So that's why my cousin's father didn't know how to stop his own seizures, right? It's simple. It's not complicated. Everything that's in this book, it's not complicated. How to build a whole civilization, a genius civilization. It's not complicated. It was never meant to be complicated, right? We just got to work through the lies, y'all, right? And get on the other side of it, into the truth, okay? It's a whole lot more I can say. It's a whole lot more. It's a lot more. But we got to start with reading a book, y'all. You've got to read From Stolen Intellect to A Genius Revolution, Awakening a Movement to Heal Generations. This is Mineral Mama. Y'all take care.